yes, I was just, okay. So we know very well that Le Corbusier is considered a sacred monster of modern architecture. But what is very, very strange and puzzling, and it was for me when I first read this, in the first book he published, Journey to the East, I mean, the first book he wrote, it was published later actually, when he made a journey through Eastern Europe, he wrote this, if you can believe it, that it was actually Le Corbusier who wrote it. There is nothing more lamentable than this mania of today to disown tradition for the sole purpose of creating the coveted new. Can you believe it? I mean, this is, you know, almost the paradigmatic father of modernity in architecture, or one of very few. And he deplores the mania, as he called it, to disown tradition. He actually defends tradition, and he attacks, you know, the quest for the new. How do you explain it? I'm very curious what you think. There is nothing more lamentable, I mean, he put it in very drastic terms, than the mania. I even considered the mania, but he himself became a maniac, if I am to use his word, not much later. Anyway, I'll read, please, if you want.
Do you want to discuss it as we go along, or you'll give us a time for discussion?
I don't know. What do you prefer? You know, if you feel like saying something now, please do so.
Okay. I don't see this as he's not presenting an extreme here. He's not saying let's embrace tradition and let's disown what. He's not suggesting the opposite. I think that what he is commenting on is there is a kind of extreme. I think the word mania is appropriate. Certainly in the many architects I have worked with, where they do not want their creation to necessarily have any reference to anything that came before. Their own work maybe, but not to anything else. And in some ways that is a bit of a mania. And he's of course using tradition as implying a sort of long history of work that was done in the past. But there's also a recent tradition, if you like, that some architects try very hard to be absolutely unique in their creations, and that is a little bit of a mania.
Thank you. Actually, some years ago, when I wrote something about Leo Krier, who was and is considered postmodern architect, and he was even the architect of Prince Charles, who loves traditionalism. He proposed a triangular, huge swimming pool in front of San Pietro in Rome, and a very iconoclastic, you know, almost disturbingly so gesture. And yeah. I asked myself, how come that this man, who apparently is immersed in history and respects history, thinks of something so provocative, while a man like Le Corbusier, for example, although he was, of course, a modern architect, he had respect for, you know, certain traditions. He even had respect for, you know, some great names. So, well, I shouldn't say even. He had respect for example, Michelangelo. He also had respect on the other side for vernacular architecture. So maybe we all have some dualities.
Right.
And I know that Le Corbusier had dualities. In fact, he was a dual personality, so to speak, almost schismatically so, all his life. And that's because he was born in the unfortunate, under the unfortunate zodiacal sign called Balance, which should be called actually imbalance. And I know what I'm talking about because
Yeah.
I am myself under this unfortunate sign, because we can find balance, but we strive for it. That's it. Anyway, but so
another angle on this statement is that, you know, the postmodernists could point to this as their source for everything that they've done.
Maybe yes, but sure, they could find some justification for what they do, I
so
guess.
we're not disowning tradition, we're kind of caricaturing it.
Yeah, the only problem is I think Le Corbusier's understanding of tradition was beyond the limitations of what traditionalism is.
Yes.
And yes, tradition in a serious, deep way means something that is normally, I would say, unwilling to succumb to the fatalities of any ism.
Yeah,
that's what I feel.
I agree with that. Yeah.
So, but let's read now that fragment, which obviously is very dear to Kenneth Frampton, if he placed it. I mean, the book begins with that quotation from Walter Benjamin, and I mean, I know that Walter Benjamin is a darling of contemporary or recent criticism or theoretization, but I like to think that it's not just because of that, because it's fashionable to quote from Walter Benjamin. So I will read that fragment with which the famous book by Kenneth Frampton begins. A clay drawing, and unfortunately I don't have it here, but I sent it through messages. Anyway, I should have included the picture. A clay drawing named Angelus Novus shows an angel looking as though he's about to move away from something he's fixedly contemplating. His eyes are staring, his mouth is open, his wings are spread. This is how one pictures the angels of history. His face is turned towards the past. Where we perceive a chain of events, he sees one single catastrophe that keeps piling ruin upon ruin and hurls it in front of his feet. The angel would like to stay, awaken the dead, and make whole what has been smashed. But a storm is blowing from paradise. It has got caught in his wings with such violence that the angel can no longer close them. The storm irresistibly propels him into the future to which his back is turned, while the pile of debris before him grows skyward. This storm is what we call progress. So this is the last word of the quotation from Walter Benjamin that the book by Kenneth Frampton begins with. Obviously, Frampton is skeptical about what we try to depict with the word progress. And this is, I think, an obvious choice or preference that he formulates at the beginning of the book in order to announce what is to follow. He's probably skeptical that our happy-go-lucky perceptions vis-a-vis the human power to transgress the debris that Benjamin mentions can be erased or diminished. In fact, it piles up, it grows. And I would like to ask you, what do you think about this? What do you think made Frampton so resolutely, maybe the word skeptical is not strong enough, because this page, these words, these thoughts of Walter Benjamin, they have apocalyptical overtones.
Yes, possibly. I mean, I can't conjecture on why Frampton used this piece, but to me, it almost is a statement of the human condition. I mean, irrespective of value judgment on whether what has gone in the past represents progress or not. Uh, if you look towards the past, over a millennia, human beings have come, they've made their works on this earth, and those works eventually end up in ruin and destruction. That's the nature of that is nature, if you like. And in fact, that destruction or creation is the flip side of the coin to destruction. If you want to create something, you have to destroy something else in order to create it. If you want to build Brasilia, you have to cut down the rainforest to build the city. And that happens at a large scale and small scale every single day. And creation is off the moment, and all the destruction is in the past.
I don't know what to say, Mahadev. I mean, yes, I understand what you said, that it is the human condition, that inevitably we are, in this perpetual, dilemma and conflict. We are part of a continuum, but at the same time, we have to break away. And the uneasy relationship with what we call tradition was always uneasy. But I think now it's kind of a special moment, and it's more than a moment. It happened for some years, maybe more than a century, because what we call modernity exacerbated this acceleration of distancing ourselves from what preceded us. That's why maybe Kenzo Tange, the great Japanese architect, said that today it's not possible any longer to rely convincingly. He didn't quite use these words, but in essence, that's what he said. And he was a Japanese, meaning very anchored in the culture of his country, and yet even he acknowledged that it's impossible today or almost impossible to continue to be part of a continuum that tradition generally meant. That continuum was broken, and that's why so many architects today even doubt the possibility to respect a context, a certain context. Even yesterday, when I mentioned Bernardo, what's his name? I'm beginning to forget names for Brescia from Architectonica. He said, in Miami, there is no context to respect. Now, maybe in Miami, yes, more than in some other places. But even...
and Houston is the same.
Yes,
there is no context.
Houston is the same, and that's why Luis Barragan, when he was asked to make a project for Houston, he said, I tried, but I couldn't because I had nothing to start from.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, Wolf Prix, who is from Vienna, he also said there is no context. We always ignore the context because that context is not any longer alive. And so there is a lot of skepticism and resistance to continue in the spirit of what once was almost unavoidable, to connect with a certain past. And today is very, very difficult, although the postmoderns try at the end of the 20th century to resuscitate certain forms of doing architecture that happened in the past, but they were very unconvincing actually. So
yeah, and it was skin deep. In fact, I was taken on a tour of Michael Graves's house by Graves himself. There was a group of us at Princeton, and we went around his house, and he showed us a particular bookshelf which looked wonderful. It looked very traditional, and it had these columns, if you like, as part of its structure that looked like wood, walnut. And he proudly said, "This is PVC pipe that has been painted to look like walnut." And it was like, okay, all right, what are you trying to do here? Yeah.
Or you could have very easily asked, why are you so proud of?
Yeah,
What are you so
exactly.
proud
Yeah.
of? I mean, yes, I mean, but you also chose to talk about Michael Graves, who, in my opinion, went too far in his
Mm,
attempt to connect with that, with what preceded him.
yeah.
But anyway,
And to the extent that it starts looking like a caricature rather than anything kind of substantial.
yes, yes. So, here we have a major theoretician of contemporary and modern architecture who, and I know he's pessimistic. I know, because just a few months ago, I sent Frampton a text I wrote about Babylon Redux, a competition I wanted to ask to launch, and I asked him, "What do you think of this text?" And he said, "I don't know. I don't know anything about Babylon, but," he said, "I know for sure that the future will be about agro-urbanism and about harvesting rainwater."
Mm,
And to me, this sounded like a man who is skeptical even of architecture in the future. He didn't mention, architecture will be in a certain way. He talks about harvesting rainwater. I mean,
mm,
this is, I would say, almost a dramatic statement, but it might not be so far away from from a possible reality or truth in the
yeah.
future. I don't know. The paradox with Kenneth Frampton is that on one hand, he seems to situate himself against the star system, but on the other hand, he's also defending it because he has his heroes, so to speak.
Yeah.
It is a star system, you can name the stars. Tadao Ando, even Richard Meyer is there, and
Mm,
of course Le Corbusier. But on the other hand, I think he distances himself. I know he tried to, and that's why I regret he's not. And I don't know if I will ask him again to join us on a Zoom meeting. But I wanted to ask him in relation to what his good friend Peter Eisenman said just 2 months ago in a conference, a Zoom, discussion by the University of Texas, together with someone from Bartlett. They discussed about various issues, and Mario Carpo, who is from Bartlett, said, "Peter, but the architect is the artist. The architect is, he actually said, Mario Carpo and Peter Eisenman agreed, the architect is the one who doesn't make buildings, but the one who makes notations. That's what he said. In other words, he just makes the plans, the sections, the drawings, the whatever, the model, and then sends them to some building site. So
mm,
the architect from the Renaissance onwards, on the footsteps of Alberti, was the intellectual, the so-called artist, divorced from the dust and misery of the building site, who from the coziness of his studio, envisions a building and expresses that vision through notations, meaning the plans. But
yeah.
I would have liked to have a chance to talk with Frampton about the conception of the architect before Alberti, meaning when the architect, just like Brunelleschi, was on the building site and was a
Yeah.
builder
Was
himself.
directing the stonemasons.
Exactly, exactly.
Mm,
And I personally think we need that architect again, not now with the pandemic, which complicates matters. But
yeah.
let's hope the pandemic will somehow be, banished in some way. So, but my feeling is, and this is in a way interesting, that this synchronicity that today also as an architect so in a way anti-modern, like Imre Makovecz was born, who I actually am tempted to think that if there is to be a future, it might be a future that belongs to a pre-modern and pre-Renaissance conception, and that is, if I am to refer to European history, of a medieval character, where there will be less of interest in so-called stars. There will be, I mean, this is wishful thinking from my part, I understand, where we'll have again great builders who can build. Now, of course, in the Middle Ages we have mainly, but not only the cathedrals, we also had some medieval towns which are very charming, and we don't quite know the architects. There weren't many names mentioned. So what I'm trying to say is that it's possible to conceive of an architecture that is done from a different position, but how to move from our present to something like that, I don't know. Again, it's more like a wishful thinking from my side, but I somehow connect, I mean, with this short text from Walter Benjamin, that how could we fight that debris that he mentions, and which is piling up, grows. In fact, he says the pile of debris before him grows skyward. And I remember when I lived for 2 years in East Hampton, when I worked there, in East Hampton, New York, which is a very bucolic and pleasant place where the rich live, there is a pyramid actually in that little town, and that pyramid is actually the pyramid of garbage. I know because I had to go.
You mentioned that to us before.
Yes,
that's true.
I will never forget. In fact, I wanted to make a movie about it, because it's so, the most monumental structure in East Hampton was actually the garbage pyramid.
I love that story when you told it.
Yeah, so I regret I didn't film it, but it does say something about when I read here, this is what Walter Benjamin was referring to already in the 40s. He committed suicide at the frontier with Spain, trying to escape the Nazis, and but he already had a premonition of this debris, this pile of debris which grows skyward. And so how could we, but on one hand, modernity seems to be agitated by its own excesses, but we have nothing to replace it with. That intermezzo with postmodernism was just that, and an intermezzo, and it didn't work well at all. And so here we are. I don't know what Kenneth Frampton did to his 5th edition of the modern architecture. I know it will be published, or maybe it was already published. He sent the text in October. So the 5th edition of that book maybe is, I don't know, anticipating something that might happen. I don't know. So here we are. On one hand, Le Corbusier, who at 22 had that question about tradition and the mania of continuously searching for the new. And on the other hand, we have Walter Benjamin, who seems to be skeptical about the state of affairs in terms of this obsession with progress. It's true that capitalism, I mean, we cannot avoid referring to capitalism, because capitalism is based on everything is about, so-called progress. We have to grow and grow and grow. It's the ideology of growth. But strangely, I read just not too long ago a word I didn't believe it was there, but it was, and that is degrowth. Degrowth. Yes, some people talk about degrowth. Degroth. So degrowth. What is degrowth? Is the opposite of growth. And
or shrinking.
Shrinking, sustainability, the climate change, the rising level of the seas, now even the pandemic, they are all forcing us to reconsider our ways. And I don't know if we'll do it, but it seems from outside of us, this is the suggestion. And in this context, I think it's interesting the work of Imre Makovecz. Although I think Kenneth Frampton, to begin with, will protest. And I would understand his protest because I don't quite agree with what Imre did, but his architecture is so very different from anything, Europeans did and do. With the exception of maybe Rudolf Steiner, the anthroposophist, and maybe now is the time, and then we can please feel free to step in and say whatever you feel like saying. Maybe now is the time to begin the presentation on Imre Makovecz, whose birthday, as I said, is today. And he died, I don't know, in 2011 or so. Anyway, just a second, let me activate the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so, is one of the very few architects from Eastern Europe who so-called made it to the Western world. And he received a lot of attention from London, from Great Britain, particularly, because he was admired by Prince Charles, but also he was also admired by Paolo Portoghesi in Rome, who wrote a book about him. I kind of know what to say about Imre Makovecz, but I would like to hear your opinions, because his architecture is indeed very different from what you would expect for this period of time. He worked essentially after the Second World War and all the way into the 21st century. So we could almost call him a contemporary architect. Now, if we look at the man at this picture, I look at his boots, which are, kind of in the clothing style, traditional clothing style of his country. But I cannot banish the thought that, for example, Daniel Lipskind, who belongs to a different group of people and ideologies and even artists, he also likes boots, maybe not so tall, except that Daniel Lipskind wears cowboy boots, and he was born in Krakow, in Poland, but he wears cowboy boots made of lizard leather. Lizard leather, can you believe it? I mean, very fine and exotic leather. To me, I mean, I'm sorry, I don't have here a picture of the boots that Daniel Lipskind wears. Anyway, I don't think you can see many architects today who would wear the pants like this in the in the boots as Imre Makovecz did. And by the way, this is maybe frivolous, but I like to refer to the way someone dresses, because, for example, if I compare, if I compare Kenneth Frampton, the way he dresses, with Imre Makovecz, or I don't know, Stephen Hall, or Toyo Ito, or Bernard Tschumi, or Peter Eisenman even, I have to say, from all of them, my liking, my personal idiosyncratic maybe liking goes for Kenneth Frampton. I like the way he dresses, and too bad I don't have pictures here with him. Uh, he dresses in a very modest way, nothing extravagant, but with a sense of reticence, which I like very much. Nothing idiosyncratic like the eyeglasses, eye frames, the glasses of Stephen Cole or Toyo Ito or Le Corbusier for the matter, or even Frank Lloyd Wright. Architects in general are have, in my opinion, sometimes dubious choices in the field of fashion. But Frampton is very, in a way, he's very much a British man. You know, he was born in England, so I don't know. He was immersed in a culture that appreciated reticence. Although not everybody born there is or was reticent. Anyway, I wanted to say something else about this. Maybe I'll remember later on. Let's continue. This is a composite drawing, if I can call it so. It is Imre Makovecz, but there are fragments of his buildings that compose his, his profile. And I have to say, when I was in New York and I had the first exhibition at Storefront for Art and Architecture, I just turned 30 then, and I made a drawing, 2 meters tall. It was wrapping paper, very thick paper, but very inexpensive paper. And I did a drawing called The Architect. Well, I kind of represented myself in this way. I composed my body of fragments of my projects. So it was, you wouldn't recognize me because you had to know my works done until then to understand that it was about that. Unfortunately, I lost the drawing and I regret now. I left it in the gallery after the exhibition, and when I came back to pick them up, it was too late. It vanished. Anyway, here is the man. Now here he is, dressed like everybody else, I guess, and he truly was a man of great force and a very personal architecture, and he was able to it's not easy. It's not an easy process to be able to participate to the concept of architectural visions and in such a personal way as he did. So you will see his works. Um, um, anyway, some drawings. Unfortunately, not too many, but we'll see others when we arrive at specific buildings. In the second half of the 20th century, who'd make such drawings? And his architecture is like this. Now, maybe, at the time of, Catalan modernismo, it would have been very common, when Gaudi worked and Pujol and so on. But in the second half of the 20th century, this was, not very common at all. He was a great master of building with wood. And so the craftsmanship of wood was very, very well, on one hand, was very developed in Hungary, and he also had knowledge about it. So he was some kind of a wood architect that would work. He didn't work just with wood, but you will arrive there and you'll understand from his buildings. He also had, Imre Makovecz had an interest in something that we totally neglect, and that is mythology, literature, narration. I know he was very fond of Carl Jung, the Swiss psychoanalyst, of course, very, very fond of Rudolf Steiner. He studied anthroposophy. So he tried to imbue architecture with even with spirit. not just with culture. But there are dangers here, because it's very difficult to do what he attempted to do, in a capitalistic society, pragmatic society, where exactly we divorced ourselves from that tradition that in his case, the one he was referring to was actually very remote. So his attempt is interesting, but there is an otherness about his architecture that probably would have puzzled, if not irritated, Kenneth Frampton. Uh, uh, anyway, I mentioned this before that once only once I was invited to show my works at Columbia University, and it was actually Frampton who invited me, and he introduced me to the students with something that I didn't understand at that time. He said, Dan Coma epitomizes the immigrant par excellence, not only in time, but also, or not only space, but also in time. And I remembered what he said, and later on I thought about it, sometimes intensively. Um, I have a feeling he might have said something similar, but for different reasons about Imre Makovecz. Because Imre Makovecz, in a way, doesn't belong to our time. For example, this house, the Koch house in this town, I guess, in Hungary. Not all pictures I have a very convincing resolution, and I apologize. But when I look at this image of this building, on one hand there is a sense of familiarity, because some buildings in Transylvania, where I was born, part of Romania, are not very different. And he here he is not so idiosyncratically inventive as in some other works. It's a large house, of course, but it bothers me, if I am to be honest, that resistance that probably would have received the acceptance of Kenneth Frampton. Because I know Kenneth Frampton, in his ways, always defended an architecture of resistance. Resistance to what? Well, resistance on one hand to that very tempest that Walter Benjamin mentioned, resistance to, I remember once when I wanted to do a series of works, and I mentioned a very unfortunate word, Arcadia, and he was very much against it, because he doesn't like the sweetness of illusions. And I think I understand now that there are trappings in this kind of architecture that Imre Makovecz, advocated and built. It's this, yes, the sweetness of Arcadia, the sweetness of lying to ourselves that this kind of architecture is still, I mean, how could you build in this way when you know that above your building could fly a bomber with an atomic bomb in it? I mean, this is, put it very blatantly, the question. Could you continue to have the illusion that you can build with such a roofing when above you could be a bomber with an atomic bomb in it? I mean, we all love to dream. I love to dream, but there are dreams that are sustainable, and there are dreams that are not, very legitimate, and this is one of them. The realities of our time are brutal. I mean, yes, we have very, very rich malls and supermarkets and so on. But the truth is that somewhere there are piles of unbelievable destructive forces that once they are unleashed, this little bucolic building would become dust. So you could say, well, we cannot think like this. No, but we can think like this, and we should think like this. Our world does not allow for bucolic dreams too much. That's why postmodernism ended up in something lamentable, because it was advocating or it was representing or it was externalizing a form of nostalgia that is difficult to defend today. On the other hand, yes, like for example, this interior is pleasant, and he uses the wood either in a more abstracted way, in a convincing way, and in a with these trees that are without anything green. To me, it's a form of nostalgia that could it is a literalness here that could irritate a thinker like Frampton. I keep mentioning Frampton because it is his birthday today as well. So I'm trying to bridge even conflictually between Imre Makovecz and Frampton, and I think it's possible to have a double discourse here. On one hand, you have the school of Frankfurt School of Thought. We have this is another thing, and this I admire in Frampton, that he's but I am also puzzled because, for example, and I'm glad I remember this. Did you ever ask yourself, what is that building which is just drawn? It's an isometric drawing on the cover of his book, Modern Architecture, A Critical History. Do you know what that drawing represents? What do you think it is? You know the drawing because it's on all the covers or all the editions of his book. Again, I'm sure that drawing was not chosen without some intention. Just like the quotation from Walter Benjamin, these are choices that he made without doubt. What is that drawing that is on the cover of his book? Do you know? Because I think it's very significant, the function of that project. It looks like a hospital, right? Or like a school. Or a building that is, I'm sorry, I don't have here a picture, but if you open, right now, Google Images, and you write modern history Frampton, you'll see it immediately. You know what it is? It is a church. It is a church which doesn't look like a church. And this is, I think, very, very interesting. Frampton chose an image on the cover of his book that shows a building that doesn't look like a church, but is actually a church. Now, what do you make of that?
That's fascinating. I just looked up the image. I couldn't bring it to mind. And yeah, as you say, it looks like a factory or a hospital.
All right. It has nothing to do with what we understand by sacred architecture at all. But it's a project for a church by Sartoris. And I think what he wanted to say, I presume, I didn't talk with him about this, that even a church, he's a complicated man. He was complicated in choosing that fragment from Walter Benjamin, and he's maybe even more complicated by the choice of the drawing on the cover of the book. I guess, but I'm not sure, but I guess in some kind of a upside down way, reverse psychology, or I don't know how to describe it, he wanted to show the deterioration of the sacred to the level of not recognizing any longer whatever we call. But I'm not sure. Maybe he's admirative. Maybe he liked that, what I call deterioration, and he would use a different word. It's possible. Because I can tell you another thing that happened to me personally in relation with him. I had once a dinner with him in New York, and then some days later, I went to a conference at Columbia. And it was a big symposium called Afterwards. And there were many of the big names of architecture there, Rem Koolhaas, Peter Eisenman, Bernard Tschumi, Kenneth Frampton, Stephen Hall. There were many. They were all in the front on the first line in the auditorium at Avery Hall. I was in the back, and the symposium lasted for a long time. It was a very well prepared and very somber, actually, symposium. I think it took place in 1995 or 1996, so the end of the millennium was approaching. And I don't know what happened to me then, but I never said anything when I attended these conferences. But in that day, I stood up at one moment and I almost shouted. I said, "We forgot to live under the sky." And then I sat down. And immediately, Michael Hayes, the director of the theory department at Harvard, stood up and said, "One shouldn't read Heidegger too much." And okay, then the discussion went to some other places, and at the end of the conference, which happened not much later, maybe half an hour later, we were exiting the auditorium, and it just happened that I passed by Kenneth Frampton, with whom I had dinner just or lunch, whatever it was, some days ago. And what disturbed me very much was that he turned his head as if he didn't know me. And I felt I actually felt insulted. So I went home. I went home because, again, this was the man I had lunch with. And just a few days earlier, I didn't know how to explain, his attitude. But I found myself at home writing a letter to him, because at that time there was no email. I wrote him a letter. I said, God, I insulted him back. I said, "Professor Frampton, I think you should begin again to wear the thick woolen hand-woven socks you told me once that you'd like to return to." And I signed and I sent him the letter. And now I will explain you, and it is connected with Imre Makovecz in some strange way. And I will tell you in what way I think this might be the case. He told me once that he was always wearing thin cotton black socks, always black, always thin cotton urban socks, if I can call them so. But he also told me that when he was a kid in England, he was wearing woolen socks that crocheted by his grandmother. And he told me, he said, I feel like returning to those old socks. The woolen, rough, hand-woven socks. So when I wrote to him that not very gentle letter, I guess I wanted to suggest to him to go back to being himself, without diplomacy, without I don't know, just to go to his own truth. Because I found I thought was to me, from my point of view, was unacceptable that he had lunch with me. Lunch, I think it was, not dinner, and we discussed for an hour or so, and then a few days later, he makes a gesture towards me as if he didn't know me, and that I found unacceptable. But I also asked myself, if he did that, and he did that, why did he do it? Well, Kenneth Frampton was and is a man, involved in a certain strata of that society, very, very capable of negotiating with his own milieu and his reality in diplomatic ways and so on. And maybe what I said is connected also with the cover of his book, because what I meant actually by quoting Heidegger that we forgot to live under the sky, in essence, what I said is we forgot about God. We forgot about that very sacred that on your book, your famous book, your highly publicized book and published book, Modern History, Modern Architecture, Critical History, you show a church that is not a church, that doesn't look like a church. In fact, that drawing says we cannot live under the sky any longer, under the sky. And on one hand, I understand, because maybe it's not possible, but the nostalgic side of me maybe still has dreams of living under the sky, living in an ordered universe where, Dostoevsky said that if God is dead, you cannot even have a captain in the army. And I would agree. So if God is dead, if we cannot live any longer under the sky, anything is possible. And when anything is possible, chaos is very close at hand. And not much later, actually, in fact, around that time, deconstruction already came upon us. Something totally inconceivable at any other time in history. The very word deconstruction would have been completely absurd for Vitruvius or Vignola or any other architect before the end of the 20th century, not to speak about the architecture itself. So something obviously happened in human society, in human life, that, yes, we have a lot of things. We can fly, we can achieve high speeds with our cars and so on. But the truth of the matter is the order is shattered, is that debris that Walter Benjamin mentioned, which is piling up, and we do not stop. And so, in a way, I understand. Maybe unconsciously, instinctually, Frampton was. It was as if he was running away from a side of himself that maybe would have agreed with me that because what I actually said was not very different from what Walter Benjamin said. I said it differently, but in essence, I was trying to say that the way we built until let's say some tens of years ago onwards, the way we built before that, we cannot any longer unless we begin again to live under the sky. But how could we live under the sky? This is a radical form of putting it. And yes, it is inspired by Heidegger. By the way of Heidegger, at the very same time at Columbia, Mark Quigley, who later became the dean at Columbia University after Bernard Tschumi left, attacked Heidegger in a talk called The Violence of the Domestic, where he was attacking Heidegger for living in unacceptably bucolical ways and forgetting, of course, his own involvement with the Nazi, ideology. But I think he was, and he was in a way right, Mark Quigley, because yes, there could be violence in domesticity as well. Hidden behind sweetness. The wife makes cookies at the stove, and the philosopher looks at the horizon, the mountains, and Arcadia. That very Arcadia that irritated or could have irritated Frampton. But let's come back to, I just threw in, and forgive me, I didn't plan to do this. I did it spontaneously, maybe not always very inspired. But let's come back to Imre Makovecz, because this image that I look at.
Yeah. I did have a thought about the angel and living under the sky, if I may share that now.
Please.
In some ways, that whole metaphor of the angels being kind of wafted by these forces and is looking back on this pile of debris which is growing to the sky. If you think of it in environmental terms, we are at towards the edge of the point where we can be wafted into the future and kind of just view or distance ourselves from the mountainous pile of debris. The pile of debris is collapsing around us so that as we get pushed into the future, we don't have a free flow. The angel is crashing into the falling debris from the tower. That's where we find ourselves today. Sorry if that doesn't make sense, but I had to get it off my chest.
No, it's excellent. I mean, do you feel refreshed? I mean, do you think that it did get off your chest?
Yes. Thank you.
No, we thank you. But, so let's continue this journey through Imre Makovecz, because he really represents the opposite of mainstream architecture. And of course, there are other architects that are nostalgic. We also have to understand that he built this, in the second half of the 20th century. You will also see something that he built closer to our time. Personally, I am not totally seduced by this kind of architecture, but he did other things. And his attempt, in fact, I was talking with Daliana from Indonesia just 2 days ago, and he said, nationalism in architecture is not sustainable, and I agree with her. It's a very dangerous position to advocate today in architecture. On the other hand, a globalist architecture is equally problematic. So, I was thinking about, and I mentioned in the message I sent out that Swedish word some years ago. The Swedes, made up this word, composite word, glocal, which is made from global and local. So it's glocal, and beyond the oxymoronic nature of the word, I think the attempt to create something that is both local and global is not necessarily bad. But in the case of, and Hungary now is confronted with nationalism politically as well. And there are dangers there, That's the problem. How can you create an architecture that has a local flavor, but not too underlined, because then all kinds of undertones can happen and do happen. Yeah. On the other hand, how could we relate with figuration like we see here, figurative art? How can we connect with the literature of our culture, with the narration of our culture, with the mythology of our culture, and not fall into something that is either too, because architecture is still an abstract art. So we should not forget this, like music, they are abstract arts. But when you attempt to bring figurative elements into your architecture, you have to be very careful, because we don't have any longer that continuity. That's the problem. For Gaudi was possible, because at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, there was still a connection with what preceded him. But for us today, that is not possible. This is the earliest built work that I found by him from 1965, and is not yet alarmingly, if I can say so, alarmingly, elaborated or with nationalistic elements, but you'll see what he arrives at. Otherwise, the cars we are looking at here are, impressive, some of them, German cars. The one in the middle on the right is probably a Fiat, if it's not the copy made by the Russians, the Soviets, Mercedes and Opel, I guess, or anyway, it doesn't matter. We go to these cottages from 1965. I only found this image, but these are very early works, and it's very hard to come by the appropriate pictures. But you can already see the tellurical force of that stone wall. You see the sloping roof, which is always present in his works. He never used terrace jardin, never. Now, cultural center from 1972, similar to the house that I showed earlier, but this is a public building. But look at the sculptural elements, and it's called, his architecture is called organic, and he was not the only architect. In fact, he almost started a school, an organic school of architecture, or a school of organic architecture in Hungary. I even have a book, and there were others, younger architects or less young architects, who worked kind of in a similar way with him. There are interesting things happening here, and not everything is passeistic. There are also elements that have a certain degree of modernity. You can tell the influence of Rudolf Steiner, the philosopher turned architect. I mean, a philosopher who built a number of buildings. Sorry about the resolution of these pictures. That's what I found, but there are other images which are more generous. Now, again, at the beginning, although he had a lot of interest in cultural functions, he built a lot of restaurants. I actually read that the first sculpture that Michelangelo ever did was, he always wanted to carve a mountain, but his first job, I mean, I don't know, it sounds almost surreally untrue, but that's what I read, that the first job he had was to carve a snowman. So, Imre Makovecz, he always wanted to build for spirit, for church, for and so on, but at the beginning, he built a number of restaurants. But this restaurant looks kind of interesting. Too bad, again, the resolution of the picture is not too good. This is a building that was destroyed by fire, I think, and I don't think it's bad. It is figurative, but it's also abstract, and I don't think it's alarmingly embracing ornamentation. Very little of it. And look at the silhouette of the building. It's a womb-like building. It's a building that from afar you say this is a contemporary building. It's a modern building. Is an architect here who has a modern vision about architecture, and he was modern too. That's why I'm here you see, being that it was made of wood, it was destroyed. If you have such a function, a restaurant, it's very easy to provoke a fire, I guess, if you have too much wood. What do we see here? We see the angel of history that Walter Benjamin mentioned, and it's just a small fragment. It's too bad I don't have pictures of the Gerbich Pyramid in East Hampton, which was really a terrifying place, because when I went with my Gerbich there, there were predatory birds, many of them surrounding the so-called pyramid. And it's just incredible, that I know Mahadev knows what East Hampton is. You wouldn't think about such a site, in East Hampton, is a place for luxe, calme et volupté. Well, the place where we had to discard the garbage was the very opposite. So anyway, yeah, on the left how it was, and on the right how it became. Now the Villa Richter, it's again anthroposophic design, if I can call it so. I think it's still interesting and convincing, because he doesn't use too many so-called details that disturb the vision of the design in general terms. The truth is, beyond the architecture of the so-called mainstream architecture, there are other architectures in the world that are less known, and they deserve to be known. For some reason, they were not embraced by the media, by critics. I'm not sure this building is present in the pages of Modern Architecture Critical History by Frampton. I don't know. I don't know about the latest edition, but I don't remember seeing it in the first edition. Such a building was not occupying his interest or his mind. Although it's not, I would say, it's not a building that you could ignore so easily. And maybe because of this involvement with a certain ideology connected with, so this was an architecture that I don't know if I can improvise now sufficiently convincing argument, but this is an architecture that belongs to the soil that it springs from. And in this sense, it's probably uncomfortable for someone from the Frankfurt School, like Kenneth Frampton, because it refers to, it could stir up certain, although I know he likes Heidegger. Kenneth Frampton admires Heidegger. So Heidegger probably would have understood this building to an extent. I don't know. I'm venturing now in some dangerous zones for me, but I think there are various kinds of architecture that are possible and were possible, in the second half of the 20th century and now in the first half of the 21st century. This building, that's why I thought of this maybe strange formulation, cosmic regionalism or cosmic localism. But this is what I see in this building by Imre Makovecz. It is local, it is a localist architecture, if I am to use such an impossible word, localist, regionalist building, but it's also, it transcends the local, not because it embraces the globalism of the secular world, but rather it connects with something that, in the absence of a different word, I would say has something cosmical about it. I know that the word cosmic and cosmos are problematic, and I know that Mahadev mentioned that once that if he would talk at Princeton about cosmic design, he would be fired. But what other words should I use? Anyway, I don't think it's a bad building. What is maybe bad, if I can say so, is this door here, which is so conveniently curved at the top. I mean, it's too predictably so. But the building itself, I think it has some interesting parts, and it refers to a world with a center. And that is exactly the world we don't live in. I don't feel having a center, but Imre Makovecz was at least longing for a center. His architecture is centered. You almost feel that inside this building is the the axis mundi, the a pillar that is right in the center, representing that centeredness that the ancients couldn't live without. Now, this is a very good work, this mortuary chapel, and I really think you will see another chapel done by him. Actually, he built it in Transylvania. I think he had an understanding or an interest in what we call death. And look what he built. I mean, this is a mortuary chapel that could have been built in Norway. It could have been built in the 11th century. It could have been built in the 5th century. It could have been built, I'm thinking rather of Nordic people, Scandinavians or Iceland or, or even, somewhere in the north. Here, I think Imre Makovecz was able to connect with a very remote past and with something that is local, but also transcends, an easy reading of what localism could mean. It's a womb. This is a drawing. I don't know if he did it, but I found this drawing. It's, you could also say that it could be Jonah's story here. Is the womb, the womb, not the womb, the stomach of the whale. It's. I think it's an impressive interior. Although I have a picture a little bit further on where, and even here you can see the flatness of the slab of the floor, which is somehow in a different spirit from what is above. But what is above, I think, is very convincing. This picture, which is a more recent picture, and I think the sequence of chairs on both sides, this row of chairs, throne-like, and you'll also see later on a design for a chair throne by Imre Makovecz. Is a little bit, I think, too militaristic for such an ambience. Maybe deserved something a little bit less rigid, especially if we consider the ceiling, the roofing, the top. But there was an attempt to, like there are certain pictures taken of this space where the interior is more convincing than in others, like here also, for example. Okay. Now, but to come back to Kenneth Frampton, this is, although there is an architecture of resistance here as well. I mentioned the attempt by Frampton to encourage an architecture of resistance. Here is a different kind of resistance, but it's still resistance. It is turning one's back on the familiarity of commercial architecture, predictable architecture, rationalist architecture, is in itself a bulwark of resistance. Another unfortunate, in a certain way, function he had to serve, for the touristic culture. Sorry again for this picture, but you see that actually he's not turning his back on that very remote past that we gave up on, many of us, if not most of us. And you have this mound which also has connotations related to death, to a mortuary chamber. But strangely and inadequately, I would say this is actually a touristic lodge. The interior, what can we say? It's postmodern, but the luck that he had, if we can call it so, is that he didn't refer to a recognizable classical architectural tradition. It's more folkish, and I don't like the word folkish, but you understand, relating to folk, the folk, construction or the folk culture. Um, you would expect this to be, and it could be judged, evaluated as being too close to stage design. You would expect here to see people not, kind of from a different century, maybe with horses outside and not cars, with, I don't know, swords and so on. This is problematic, I think. Because again, how can you build in this way convincingly and at the same time have, internet, intranet? Well, at that time when he built it, these were not present. But you understand, it's still close to our contemporary state of affairs. What about this detail? It is appealing. I appreciate what I see, but on the other hand, I don't know. Is it not just literature, so to speak? Is it not just representational art at a time when perhaps it's not easy at all to connect in different ways than through abstraction? I don't know. I don't know. A camping complex and recreation center. So many of his buildings, at least from the beginning, were related to, restaurants, recreation centers, camping, and so on. Even here, I think there is a problem because to what extent the tourist, the modern tourist, lives under the sky? And this is a question I should ask myself as well. Maybe that's what irritated Kenneth Frampton then. I don't know. Is living under the sky the answer to the debris that Walter Benjamin mentioned? I don't know. Could we go back so dramatically? I don't know. Maybe not. So maybe my comment then was not adequate. On the other hand, I appreciate this because I made a presentation about the cave revival. Well, here we have the literal cave revival, and it's not so convincing somehow. On the other hand, some architects and some of the very prestigious ones flirt with this theme, the cave. Sorry for, I couldn't find great pictures with some of his buildings. Anyway, a sky, again, a building destined to sports. But this one I like. I like because there is something about it that is, I think is very plausible for us today when we use quite often the word sustainable and this kind of architecture, which also has a level of spontaneity, some kind of ad hoc interventions, it appears. Of course, you need a craftsman to place those pieces of wood in this way. You can do it without some skilled workers convincingly. But I like this building, and actually is not very different from a digitally produced project done by Shop in New York for PS1, where they created a pavilion, at least from the outside, looking not very different from what we see here, except that Imre Makovecz did it, by manual means. So this building, I'm very curious. In fact, I'm going to ask him. I'm curious what Frampton might have thought of this building, because this building certainly does belong to our time because of the connection with what we might mean by the word sustainability. But also in terms of aesthetics, it's kind of an aggregate building, is made up of these fragments, which are, it's almost like some kind of a rebirth in terms of fragility, this is a vulnerable building, but I think its vulnerability is actually a quality and not a defect, not a problem. I like it. You would say that this is not a building built by an architect. It's by someone who doesn't know anything about architecture. But this is exactly what I like. It's not easy for an educated architect as Imre Makovecz certainly was to build such a building. And look at it in the winter is. I think is good. Maybe the entrance there is a little bit predictable, but the roofing and is fine. Um, I like this building. Now, a sports hall from 1985-1999. This was the time of glory for postmodernism. I don't have, again, very great pictures, but you wouldn't expect a sports hall to look like this. Well, it does for Imre Makovecz. You might have expected it, with equal legitimacy to think that this is some kind of a church. I mean, because you see the tower behind, and you might say that it's an addition to the church. Well, it's not. It's destined for sports events. And here it is. But at that time also Paolo Portoghesi and others were building kind of in a similar way. And today we don't have a lot of patience for such architectures. But at that time, at the end of the millennium, there was a lot of nostalgia, and I think we were afraid to cross the threshold between the 20th century and the 21st without some encouragement from the past. And this is what happened all over the world at that time, even in the case of Dan Coma, who did unbelievable things at that time. A community center is actually, I showed it before. Yeah, this building I like. And it is, you see, in plan, is not as innocent as it appears from the outside. In other words, you have symmetry. This is clearly a willful architect. From the outside, it doesn't seem so from this side. But if you look at the plan, with its symmetry and even with its, you might discern some symbolism here that, two opened wings. Are they the wings of the angel of history? I don't know. But what he made with that plan is something a little bit different, almost as if he's negating his own plan through the physical reality of the building. And I like the way he insinuates the windows, rather discreetly. I think it's an interesting building, this building. No, I will write to Frampton to ask him what he thinks. I don't know if he will answer, but I'm curious what he would say about this building. Because this building also seems to say, I also know about the angel of history. This is what this building seems to say. A church from 1986. And this is a typical, accomplished, mature Imre Makovecz, so to speak. Now, again, there is a danger here when you bring in literature and symbolism and mythology. When you place wings there, again, are they the wings of the angel of history? No. But they are wings, all right, and they are too explicit, too literal, too too obvious, and I don't know. Personally, I'm uneasy with this kind of representational architecture. But how can you bring back narration into architecture? without, or maybe we shouldn't. I don't know. I said it before and I say it again, and you probably know that Victor Hugo said that the book killed the cathedral, because with Gutenberg, the book began to be published more and more and more. The narration went to the pages of the book. So the narration left the building, left the walls of the cathedral. But now the book is itself under siege from the digital world, the virtual world. So the book might be killed by the digital world. So maybe the narration could, I don't know, maybe it could happen. We would have again a very strong oral culture, you know, and who knows how architecture might happen if we are to have again architecture. But it is an interesting building, but somehow it's too close to stage design, it's too literal, I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, it's a little Disney-esque as well, isn't it? And it's
yes, 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 it is, unfortunately. And there is one built in Transylvania more so than this one, and you'll see it very soon. Unfortunately, yes, the Disney-esque is very, very problematic. But on the other hand, when you think that even Paris built a Disney, the first Disney European enterprise is right near Paris. I always wondered why they built it. You know, anyway, but the interior, you know, the interior has some elements which are, you know, the structure of the roof has some integrity and some, you know, yeah, a certain vigor that is too bad that is challenged by those decorative Disney-like elements. Yeah, it is very difficult what he attempted. I don't know if Imre Makovecz was aware of the difficulties, because he was trying to connect with the past, and it's very, very difficult to do that, if not impossible today. Now, another church, and this one is quite impressive. You know, I look at those towers, those spires. I see the sun and I see the moon, and then I see the cross above them. And you know, I know he was a Roman Catholic, a fervent Roman Catholic, and that might be a problem because, for example, at Chartres Cathedral in France, there is a tower that symbolizes the sun and the tower that symbolizes the moon, but there is no third tower that is taller than the other two, like here. And in the Middle Ages, the builders of the great Chartres Cathedral were just happy to have a tower symbolizing the moon, and a tower that is the oldest actually, and a newer tower symbolizing the sun. They didn't need to plant the cross at a much higher level. In other words, they were just happy to understand that the sun and the moon were God. But here, if I'm allowed to interpret it in this way, Imre Makovecz seems to say that above the sun and the moon, there is, you know, the Christian symbol. And I think it's a problem here, because I do agree with I know this might infuriate or unsettle certain believers, but I kind of agree with Frank Lloyd Wright when he was asked, do you believe in God? And he said, yes, I do, but I spell it nature. So, you know, what could be higher than the sun and the moon? You know, but in this building it is, and I think this is a problem with all his work. This ideologization of architecture through you know, through religion in a way, at least at the level of this program, meaning a church. But it's not just here. I think he's at his best when he stays out of the figurations that the ideological side of religion or yeah is manifested itself. But still, I think this church is not to be ignored. Um, yes, that tower in the center makes me uneasy. But the idea, and here is obviously the read of Carl Jung and of his books on alchemy and so on, because he works with both the sun and the moon. And this is what actually even Le Corbusier did in his project for the assemblage, the most important building at Chandigarh, the parliament. He also had in his mind, as he called them, les fêtes cosmiques, the cosmic, celebrations based on the sun and the moon. So, but this triumph of the cross over the sun and the moon makes me a little bit uneasy, because it proclaims the supremacy of a specific religion. But what about those who have a different form of faith? Anyway, but it's still an interesting building. It is schematic in a way, but he combines here, the womb-like structure with the verticality of the spires. But again, for someone connected with the Frankfurt school like Kenneth Frampton, this would probably make him uneasy. I personally have more preference for the great churches that the Germans built in mid-century, in the 60s, around the 60s in Europe, that are devoid of oppressive ideologies, and they are still very convincing, modern churches. But this one also, I think, it cannot be ignored or wiped out. You cannot wipe it out of the pages of the history of architecture in the second half of the 20th century. Although it is very different from most works done in the second half of the 20th century. I think his ability to unite the profane with the sacred is a beneficial one, because yes, the religious ideology is obvious, but the sensuousness of the nave, it's almost pagan. And this is how I feel tempted to interpret it. He somehow attempted to connect the pagan with what his religion stood for. I don't know, maybe also because of the connections. I mean, this organic architecture is bringing in, biology, and it is bringing in nature, at least to an extent. Now, inside, what can we say? It's very, very difficult to handle such a program exclusively through abstract means. I'm not saying it's impossible. Actually, good, convincing architectures did just that. Le Corbusier did it at Saint-Pierre-de-Firminy-Vert, even more at La Tourette, and to a good extent at La Ronchamp, at Ronchamp. Now, this is a school, Petter's school, Arpad. He has another school, Arpad Weser School. I only have two images. What can we say? It's a moderate expressionist here, and yes, very local. But also with a Gothicism that was also advocated to an extent in Germany by Gottfried Böhm. I don't know. I don't know. A theater and Hungarian community center in Slovenia. Uh, yes, there are problems. We know when you try to bring in ornamentation or decoration, there are problems. It's very difficult to do it convincingly. In other words, to be. I mean, look at the cars. You know, the cars in front of the building wake you up. Wait a minute, you live in the 20th century, 21st century, and those almost folkish, again, why am I using this word? Those ornaments that are somehow connected with the folk culture could be a little bit disturbing. But you know, Mahadev mentioned appropriately the name of Disney. That is a problem, you know, when you, although if you compare him with Michael Graves, he is here a little bit saved by the very fact that his architecture is anchored in the culture of his country. So that local culture offers a little bit of legitimacy to his buildings, something that unfortunately Michael Graves didn't have. So he had to borrow various elements from other countries or even continents, and certainly different times. Yeah, some drawings for this particular building. It's hard. It's really hard. How can you do an architecture anchored in the culture and the traditions of your country today? How can you be national or local when everything is advocating rather globalism, not localism? It's very difficult, I think. Now we arrive at an important work by him, the Hungarian Pavilion at the Seville Expo in 1992 in Spain. And this was the project, and it was built. Interestingly, actually, now I just had this idea. What I see at the top, if you look at the top drawing, those towers on the roof of the big nave, the womb-like building, reminds me strangely with a iconoclastic project done by Mark Forn recently for a competition in South Korea. This idea to have a building which expresses, I mean, it's almost like a mini Manhattan, or you know, a metropolis in miniature at the top of. I mean, it is one building, but it has those many, not many, but a number of little towers at the top, which could evoke, you know, more than just a single building. And this is the building. You know, I'm sure it stood out. You know, because in 1992, most buildings were, you know, resolutely modern. That's when deconstruction happened with the exhibition at the MoMA, I think was in 1992, around that time, yes. And look at what Imre Makovecz was up to at that time. And I mean, you see the buildings around. This building is really from a different world and a different time. Again, these two wings, you know, talking about the angel of history. I didn't thought of it, but I like those oranges though, and the top left corner, Spain. Yeah, so this is the building, you know. It's a you know, unique building, but I think it is weakened by the decorative elements, by the literature, if I can call it so. On the other hand, the voluptuousness of the nave, of the big space, and the towers create you know, a building that you cannot really be indifferent towards. he planted, uprooted a tree, and this was a sacrificial act, you know, to 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 actually kill a tree in order to probably probably to advocate its cause, you know, to bring it into the center and show the drama of the uprooted tree. It's almost like a paradox, you know. You kill a horse in order to show the you know the terrible tragedy of killing a horse. By killing a horse, here you kill a tree in order to show that that's what we do. We kill trees. I don't know. It's something here that makes me a little bit sad and uncomfortable, you know. But this was done even by a sculptor like Robert Smithson in the United States. You know, you try to bring to the consciousness of society stones. So what do? You uproot stones. You bring them into an art gallery in order to emphasize the presence into the world. But it's something about it. And also Wang Shu, the Chinese architect, he did something also similar. He brought from China to Venice, to the biennial in Venice, with a ship, a large quantity of ceramic tiles, roof tiles, in order to build a temporary roofing on the earth, to make a statement in a way about, in this case, Imre Makovecz, about the tree, in the case of Robert Smith on about the stones, and in the case of Wang Shu, the ceramic roof tiles from China. But just think about how unsustainable the whole activity is. Here we kill a tree. In the case of Robert Smithson, we spend big efforts and big money to bring a lot of stones to an art gallery in Manhattan from who knows where, and the Wang Shu bringing to Venice all the way from China roof tiles. So this shows, I think, these three examples show the unrest of the human beings. We continuously stir ourselves up with gestures which actually amplify the noise of the world and the unsustainability of the world. You know, maybe, but then because we continuously want to demonstrate something, you know, so we bring this tree maybe from Hungary all the way to Spain. We uproot it, we kill it essentially in order to attract attention to the drama of the tree. But I wonder if we cannot do this without killing the tree. You know, maybe find other ways, just project it on a wall and not kill the tree. So I don't know if I'm interpreting correctly what I see here. I knew about this project, and I know you can even travel underneath. I mean, you can walk underneath the roots of the poor tree. You know, I wonder what the tree thought of what we did or he did. You know, but we don't talk with the trees any longer. You know, we don't even ask ourselves questions of the kind: what would the tree feel like? You know. I don't know. It's something here that, but I understand the theatrics. I understand if he wants to make a point, but he wants to make a point by amplifying the drama instead of decreasing it. Another church.
Sorry, Dan, I have to leave at this point. Thank you very much. It was very interesting so far.
Thank you, Mahadev. Thank you. Thank you for being present. Bye. So this is another church. I don't know. I mean, you see, he has the same way of building, you know. So he has his own mannerisms, you know, two wings, and you enter from below and into a tower, and then into a nave and into a womb-like structure. He is unique, no doubt, and you know, but I don't know if I verbalize sufficiently well, but I have a feeling I understand, at least in part, why Frampton would have been irritated by such an architecture. This is some kind of a cultural center. Um, it's this is kind of interesting too. I mean, look at that facade, almost a classical facade, but it's slanted. You know, as for the interior, what can I say? I mean, we see those mimicked trees that are they are Disney-esque, to use Mahadev's word, and I don't think he abstracted them sufficiently. No, in fact, he didn't even attempt to abstract them. Certainly not these trees. It's too bad. But here again, I see the influence of anthroposophy, and that is of Rudolf Steiner and Goetheanum, his Goetheanum. But strangely, the Goetheanum by Rudolf Steiner, which was built, I don't know, 70 years earlier, was more abstract than the buildings by Imre Makovecz. Another community center. Now this is makes me really uneasy because you know, first of all, I would have thought this was a church. It's a community center, whatever that means, and it's just I don't know. It's almost a historicist pastiche, and it's just I think Kenneth Frampton would have exploded at this point. So I'm not insisting. I regret, you know, this wood, you know, is solid wood. This is not mimicked wood. It's real wood, and yeah. Moving forward, I understand we want the sacred, but you know, I don't think this is the way to approach the sacred. Now, a funeral chapel in Sfântu Gheorghe, and we have someone here, if he's still here, who is from Sfântu Gheorghe, even though recently he moved there. A funeral chapel, and it's not actually without some interest, is this one. Although it's not very dissimilar from the other things that we saw by him. It's a funeral chapel. What can we say? It's at a smaller scale what we saw earlier in his churches. Now, the Onion House Cultural Center in Hungary, in Mako, again, there is some kind of a biological symmetry or cultural symmetry, you know, with biological overtones. For some reason, I imagine around that time, this building might have been appreciated in Japan. I'm imagining, and it's interesting what is going on here. You know, it seems there is a double roofing here. There is a roof here, and then there is the other one above, and it is interesting. That's why I thought I'm not totally sure that I am totally right in calling his localism or regionalism. Sometimes in some works, not all of them, cosmic regionalism. But maybe, I used another expression, exalted regionalism. So as opposed to the critical regionalism of Kenneth Frampton, to have an exalted regionalism. So instead of negating it, to actually amplify it to something that makes it a little more than what you usually try to depict with the word, you know, regionalism. And of course, if you go from exalted to cosmic, you amplify it accordingly. Okay, so yeah, another building by Imre Makovecz, and you know, this view of the interior. And then we go to a swimming pool. Again, we have the tower and the cave in a way. You know, the tower, it is as it is. But I have to say, the organic architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright in his later years, particularly after he was 85 or so, after he built the Guggenheim, and especially his projects for Baghdad, are kind of equally Disney-esque. Although this one is not so alarmingly Disney-esque, but it is to an extent. And that is the risk when you try to mimic, in a way, to mimic your own culture. I know it sounds kind of strange. You mimic what you already are. In other words, instead of being who you are, you mimic who you are. I'm not sure myself I understood very well what I said, but I have a feeling it might be correct. Anyway, the Roman Catholic Church in Miercurea Ciuc in Romania from 2001. And this one is, for all to see, a building that, you know, is a church indeed. I mean, you know, you have just on one side 4 big crosses, there 5 actually, and 5 on the other. You know, I don't know. One would not have been enough. We have the rhetorics of religion here, you know, amplified sculpturally, quite dramatically. But he tried to create something. You know, you might not agree with what he tried to create. It's not a work that you know is copying, you know, a certain dogmatic model. And the wooden trees at the interior, and the wings, we see the ubiquitous wing on the left, and it is in Miercurea Ciuc in Transylvania. And yeah, the 2 trees that had been planted conveniently left and right, symmetrically. Okay. And now a Reformed church on Donav Street in Cluj, Romania. This one is more alarming because this one really is Disney-esque. Look at it, you know, it's, I don't know. I mean, you know, and it's from 2008. He built it 3 years before he died, but it's just, I find it almost unacceptable. I'm sad it was built. Pancho Arena, this one, this is the entrance, and we have the Pancho Arena from this KF, I don't know, Hungarian. This is better than the church in Cluj, but it's still, you know, the only surprising thing is, and you are surprised, it is actually a soccer field, you know, it's an arena, sports field. And I don't know, is it the place here for Gothic architecture or neo-Gothic architecture, or, although the structure is interesting there, but I don't know. Just imagine, you know, some soccer players running around, and then you have a body, you think you are in a Gothic cathedral when you watch the soccer game. It's something a little bit awkward, I would say. Anyway, yeah, at that time also Paolo Portoghesi was building something like this, unfortunately. Now this is, we are approaching the end. This might be the last work. Is his own house, which he built when he was very close to dying. In fact, he died a few months after he built it. As the Turks have this saying, in Turkey, there is this saying, when you finish the house, here comes death. And unfortunately, this is what happened to Imre Makovecz. It's a house. It was refurbished. I think it was even enlarged a little bit. I think I would be on the side of Kenneth Frampton here if he was looking at this, because I don't know. I'm not convinced at all about this kind of architecture. This is his own office, his own room, if I can call it office. And now it is a museum and the center for studying his work, his archive, and so on. I don't know if when he was alive, if that desk was so organized, and I see there even the coffee cup and whatever. Okay, and this is a drawing from vol d'oiseau of the building, and this is the plan. The plan makes me think of a building built by Frank Lloyd Wright, but that one, yeah, was the same idea. I think it's okay, but I don't know the external, and also the section is alarmingly, I don't know, in a way static and placid, and and this motif with all the wings, is just too much. Representational art and literal art, and too facile as a symbol, I would say. It should have been abstracted, and it was not. Anyway, we have seen something similar in a building at the beginning. But this view is kind of interesting because it's asymmetrical and it's more abstract. And anyway, but this, this corner window is, I don't know. Anyway, and now a chair, a throne by him and that person, Gabor, who they built it together, I think. And, it's a throne. It's more of a throne than a chair. And yeah, it is a chair that is not modern. It refers to something else. It's a chair that almost has the seater on it, without the seater being there. That's it. So we talk more, or I talk more about Imre Makovecz than about Kenneth Frampton.